Good evening and welcome to another episode of ShireTV. I'm Darryl W. Perry.
And I'm James Cleveland. Tonight we welcome back Derek J., the star of the Derek J's Victimless Crime Spree and also host of the daily news show, Peace News Now. It's good to see you again, Derek.
It's great to be with you both. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. On February 12th, police in Union County, Illinois investigated a suspected meth lab. Laura Benson said, "I heard the dogs barking and I knew that meant somebody was outside the house. And I looked out the windows and I saw a truck coming up the driveway fairly fast and a police car right behind it." Laura said she thought her son had done something wrong. Then she says she couldn't believe her ears when she heard the drug agents say they were investigating a meth lab. Laura Benson said, "They pointed to the buckets and I told them my husband has a hobby of making maple syrup." KFVS TV reported the Bensons have been making their own maple syrup for about 5 years. This was the first time they've been mistaken for a meth lab.
Laura Benson of Union County, Illinois was shaken when drug agents rapidly swarmed her home. At first, Benson thought her son might have done something wrong, but then she was surprised to hear drug agents were there to investigate. Hey, Laura, tell us what went down.
I heard the dogs barking, and I knew that meant somebody was here, and I looked out the window, and I seen a truck coming up the driveway fairly fast, and a police car right behind it.
What? Get out of here, you're crazy. What happened next?
They had a report that there was a meth lab going on our property, and they wanted to investigate it.
Shut up. Really? This is getting good. Then what?
They pointed out the trees and the buckets, and I told them that my husband had a hobby making maple syrup.
It was just maple syrup?
Of course, they realized that after they seen it, but I was quite startled this morning.
The truth is, Laura was mostly relieved that agents didn't find the 18 pounds of black tar heroin she keeps in her breakfast nook. Just kidding, she keeps it in the basement. Just kidding, she doesn't have heroin, it's cocaine. Just kidding, she doesn't have any kind of illegal drugs. Come on, this woman is obviously a law-abiding citizen. Apparently, someone saw the maple syrup collection tubes and buckets and thought it looked suspicious, so they called authorities. The Union County Sheriff said that it is their standard procedure to investigate every tip the department gets. The Bensons have been making their maple syrup for 5 years, but this is the first time their collection setup has caused this type of reaction. The family says they're grateful for their alert neighbors and are glad to set their minds at ease. The drug agents were sent home with a jar for themselves, which makes one wonder if this was all just an elaborate scheme to score some free organic maple syrup. That stuff's expensive.
You know, one thing that I find really interesting about this story is the Stockholm syndrome that the Benson family apparently has, to where they thank their neighbors for being snitches and then invited them over for pancakes. But I guess good news for the cops, they got some free maple syrup. Derek, what are your thoughts on this?
The Bensons are just good neighbors. Sounds like they're an independent folk, and I suppose the people in Illinois aren't as familiar as some people in the Shire societies in Vermont and New Hampshire, where maple syrup runs in our blood. But this family was just being neighborly, and I'm glad that they were able to go unscathed from their police encounter.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that the first reaction of these people is, I see something suspicious, so instead of going and talking to my neighbor, I'm going to call the police and report it. And if it was a meth lab, it would not be outside in plain view,
connected to a tree,
and with blue buckets that you could see from the road. I mean, like, people need to use their brain.
All I know about making meth is what I've seen in Breaking Bad. And they went out into the middle of the desert in an RV. They didn't go and attach buckets to trees. So the whole thing seems sort of ludicrous, and it just shows that, one, society isn't the same as it was 40 years ago or even 10 years ago. to where if you have a problem with your neighbor or you think your neighbor is doing something wrong, you go talk to your neighbor. Now it's sort of hypersensitive and almost police state to where the first thing, if you see something, say something. So you call Big Brother.
I'm encouraged by the Bensons for having the attitude that they kept and for having the ability to set such a positive example despite their intrusion on their freedoms, that they were responding by saying, come on into our house and here's a free sample of what we produce. This is a great example to set where for their neighbors who obviously need some more skills when dealing with their neighbors. Calling the police is typically not a very friendly way to relate to the people who live around you.
Now, I wonder if the Bensons sell their maple syrup in local farmers markets, and if this news and media attention that they're getting, if that might help their maple syrup hobby turn into a maple syrup business.
Yeah, that would be a pretty funny advertising campaign. Like, I guess our maple syrup's so good, even the police want it or something. Maybe
better than meth.
Yeah, and in other news, Reason.com reports Law Enforcement Targets Incorporated has received contracts totaling $5.5 million with various federal law enforcement agencies across the country and recently developed a new line of targets which they labeled the No More Hesitation series, which depicts armed children, pregnant women, and young mothers. According to their marketing team, the subjects in the No More Hesitation targets were chosen in order to give officers the experience of dealing with deadly force shooting scenarios with subjects that are not the norm during other training.
Shortly after this story broke, the company decided to pull this series of targets and made the following statement. We apologize for the offensive nature of our No More Hesitation products. These products have been taken offline due to the opinions expressed by so many, including members of the law enforcement community. This product line was originally requested and designed by the law enforcement community to train police officers for unusually complex situations where split-second decisions could lead to unnecessary loss of life, consistent with our company mission as a training supplier, not a training methods company. We will continue to seek input from law enforcement professionals to better serve their training objectives and qualification needs. We sincerely appreciate law enforcement professionals for the risk they take in providing safety and defending freedom.
Yeah, and I don't know how often, I guess the police are confronted by a pregnant woman holding the gun. I don't imagine it's very often. And it's sad that they think this is some contingency that we must plan for. We have to plan for a 5-year-old child holding the gun. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. And even if the child is holding the gun, it's not likely to be a real firearm, and it may lead to a tragic shooting. There should be hesitation, especially with the child. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Right, and they're showing these targets saying, we're training people for situations that require a split-second decision to prevent unnecessary loss of life, and yet they're showing targets that if one were to, in a split-second decision, decide to fire upon, would cause loss of life.
It seems to me that the law enforcers in this situation are experiencing a bit of schizophrenia because it's said in the story that the law enforcers helped design the targets and yet they were also responding negatively to the production of these targets.
Well, so maybe it was the 5% that are the good apples that responded negatively to what the 95% design.
It's also of note that the company in question is Law Enforcement Targets, Inc.
Yeah, so their business is providing, I guess, targets for law enforcement. So in theory, I guess they knew what they wanted. They're going to come out with this product line that I guess there's a great demand for, but I don't think it's a situation that occurs very much. And I remember once I was watching the History Channel about the Secret Service, and this agent was talking about they were driving in the motorcade, and he saw a person holding the gun, and it was actually a child holding a water gun, and he almost mowed him down. He was a split second away from shooting him. You know, even though they were in a bulletproof limousine, and even if it was a firearm, it wouldn't have been any threat to, you know, the motorcade. But
Well, thank goodness that because of these targets, there will be no more hesitation. It's very comforting to know that a child with a water pistol could be gunned down because his law enforcers and protectors have been trained to shoot him.
You know what target I'm really waiting on this Law Enforcement Targets Incorporated to come out with? Puppy dogs. Because we all know that the Drug Task Force loves shooting puppy dogs.
In fact, I don't think they need any more training shooting dogs, because it seems to be a pattern across law enforcers across the country that often the family members called the pet are often the ones who are gunned down first, because often puppies can be very dangerous to law enforcers when they're in the middle of a no-knock raid.
Well,
and
dogs
they're
are
the first
very-
threat to have to go away.
Dogs are very curious, and when they see a person approaching, their first instinct is, let me go see what this thing is. And so they approach, oftentimes with their tongue out and their tail wagging in very happy moods of, hey, it's a new person, come pet me. And that is very intimidating to certain members of law enforcement, and that threat has to be taken care of. In 2 weeks, on March 12th, the city of Keene will hold official ballot voting regarding the new school budget, related articles, and new members of the Board of Education for 3-year terms. There are 8 candidates running for 3 available positions. Among those 8 are 3 who, unlike the usual status quo of big spending school bureaucrats, believe in a smaller, less obtrusive system where the parents have full control over their children's education. Local school elections have usually very low turnout. Those voters who do show up are typically teachers, school administrators, and the friends and family of those too. With this in mind, it's no wonder the budget continues to go up every year. In order to effect real positive change in our community, I encourage those of you at home who have lost faith in politicians who have no qualms in increasing the already dangerously high tax rate year after year to come out on the 12th and vote against the status quo. There are other solutions to our problems other than the usual throw more money at it fix. But it requires us to all step back and seriously reconsider the current monopoly the government holds on our educational system in this country.
yeah, and I know you can probably elaborate more on the budget, but one interesting thing that I thought you pointed out was, you know, roughly half the budget actually goes to actually instructing the children, and you know, the other half goes to support functions, which they probably could scale back or find ways to eliminate. Or I liked your idea, make it like a revenue neutral, you know, fee service where you would pay for the cafeteria lunches, pay for the school bus. I think that's a great user fee idea.
Yeah, if you look at the figures that are publicly available, which are a couple of years old, it shows an attendance at the Keene school system of 3,788 students. When you divide that by the $62.3 million proposed budget, that's roughly $17,000 per child. But if you take that same figure and divide by the actual instructional cost as put out by the Keene School Board, it's roughly $9,000 per child to educate the child. So the other $8,000 goes on school administrators and other things that are deemed support functions. Where if you look at private schools, they educate children for approximately 1/3 of the actual instructional cost that the government-run school system uses. So if you actually incentivize the school system to offer a better education at a better price, then that price could drastically be reduced, thus reducing or eliminating the school tax portion of the property tax bill that every homeowner pays directly and that every renter pays indirectly.
Yeah, and everyone knows that, you know, governments, they have no incentive to decrease their budget. If they decrease their budget, they're actually penalized for doing so, they don't get as much next year. So there's going to be no attempt to innovate, to find better ways to do things. I mean, it's ridiculous. As technology improves, it should be cheaper to educate children, not more expensive.
Well, and if you were at the deliberative session or the school board meeting that was held a few weeks beforehand, you would notice that one of the members of the school board said, we have to increase the budget because our enrollment is declining. And that is just completely contrary to logic. Because if you own a small business and your amount of customers decrease, you don't increase the total amount that you spend on operating your business. You find ways to cut and reduce your cost so that you can actually stay in business.
It seems to me to be pretty common sense that a person ought to pay for what he or she uses. And conversely, that if a person is not using a good or service and is not interested in using anything from the school, that they wouldn't have to pay for those services. And so I'm surprised that this is still an issue in Keene.
Yeah, and I would like to encourage everyone to attend the school board candidates forum that's being held next Monday, March 4th at the Keene Middle School at 6:30 p.m. On February 14th, the Criminal Justice Committee of the New Hampshire legislature held hearings on 3 different bills to either legalize or decriminalize cannabis. I testified in support of HB 337, the bill to repeal all sections of the RSAs related to cannabis. This was my testimony to that committee.
It would be.
Yeah, sorry. I apologize for that.
I'm Darryl Perry. I'm one of the co-chairs of the New Hampshire Liberty Party. And I'm going to give a slightly different testimony and hopefully answer some of the questions that have been asked previously and have not been answered. The question was asked about the conflict between state and federal government. Well, in 1798, Thomas Jefferson put forth the idea of nullification. And he wrote, if the federal government has the exclusive right to judge the extent of its own powers, it will continue to grow. Tom Woods expounds and says, regardless of elections, the separation of powers, and other much touted limits on government power, it continues to grow. Over the years, nullification was used to nullify unconstitutional federal laws. Most notably, the government of Wisconsin nullified the Fugitive Slave Act and refused to assist slave owners in regaining custody of their runaway slaves who took up refuge in the state. More recently, states have used nullification to push back against the drug war, mandatory health insurance, and indefinite detention that was authorized in the 2012 NDAA. Someone asked earlier for a comparison of a substance that is illegal at the federal level, yet legal at a state level. I have an answer, but please allow me to tell a brief story of a 2011 raid in Southern California in which several agencies, including the FBI, raided a legal business and, according to a witness, quote, raped and pillaged. What offensive product triggered this raid? The destruction of a business and the arrest of the owner? Raw milk. Raw milk is legal in New Hampshire despite federal prohibition on interstate commerce of the substance. I urge the committee and the general court to place cannabis on the same level. And on a final note, someone asked the question of how do you report illegal income on a Form 1040? Well, if you read the instructions for line 21 of the Form 1040, it says to include income from illegal activity. I will answer any question. Yes.
Yes, you spoke about the notion, the idea of nullification.
Yes.
Do you think that was the basis that the southern states used when there was an attempt to impose the manumission of human beings held in bondage? Do you think states have the right to reject it?
Actually, nullification was never used to support the idea of slavery. It was, however, used to oppose the Fugitive Slave Act.
Representative Valencourt.
If we start getting into the history of nullification, I think you're referring to the Kentucky resolutions of Jefferson.
Yeah.
Nullification in the South was basically used in the 1830s by South Carolina to oppose tariffs. But I don't think we want to get into that, because that's more than we can get into here, although it might become important. So the question is there anything we can learn from what Colorado and Washington have done? If in fact they have these illegal substances, Colorado's trying to tax them. What's happening there?
I believe that Colorado and Washington are definitely on the forefront of full nullification of the drug war. And I hope that New Hampshire can join in sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much, sir. Representative Weed.
That was a great testimony, Darryl, and
Thank you.
I really liked, I guess how you, I don't know if you brought it up, but the issue of nullification came up, and I guess that was a pretty big topic at Liberty Forum this year. The keynote speaker, Tom Woods, actually spoke about this, and
He actually wrote a book called Nullification.
yeah, and it's important to realize, like, it's not just marijuana you can nullify on. I thought it was a great example that you pointed out, like the raw milk, and maybe some states will use nullification against federal firearm laws. And
Well, some states have already done that. Tennessee and I believe Montana have what they call the Firearm Freedom Act that states that any firearm manufactured, purchased, and possessed within the jurisdiction of that state are not subject to federal law. So the only way a firearm from Tennessee or Montana would fall under federal law is if it crosses state boundaries. But the reason that I mentioned nullification is there were multiple witnesses that testified in favor of either legalizing, taxing, regulating, or the full legalization, which I support. The question was, how do you justify a state law that is in opposition to federal law? And no other witness had an answer for that. So that's why I said I'm giving a testimony that is slightly different, and I'm hoping to answer questions that were unanswered by others.
yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, there are two states that have, I guess, basically legalized marijuana.
Taxed and regulated, which most people call legalized.
Well, I guess it's a step in the right direction. I think all of us at this table would say the government shouldn't even be involved with it. However,
It should be as legal as tomato seeds.
that's pretty funny.
I thought it was important that you brought up, Darryl, that nullification was used during the Fugitive Slave Act, which, if people aren't familiar, was the law that said that Northerners who came upon Southern slaves who had escaped, or in other words, were fugitives, had to return them to their owners in the South. And a lot of people felt uncomfortable about this and decided to nullify those laws in their own states.
Wisconsin actually officially nullified the Fugitive Slave Act, and that decision by the state of Wisconsin was upheld by the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And there's a very interesting story that we don't have time to get into completely that involved a fugitive slave who was being basically assisted by someone in Wisconsin. And when the slave owner found out, he went to Wisconsin and recaptured his slave, and then the folks in the town actually went and arrested the slave owner for violating the Wisconsin state law that had nullified the Fugitive Slave Act.
That's really exciting that there are, I guess, historical examples of nullification working. And, you know, it has such a bad rap, you know, I guess, the history of racism and slavery, but I mean...
Right, because people misconstrue what nullification actually was. The very first instance of nullification was the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions that nullified or attempted to nullify the Alien and Sedition Acts, which made it illegal to speak badly against the Congress or the President of the United States. Exempted from that was the vice president, who happened to be Thomas Jefferson. You could say all the mean, nasty things about Jefferson that you wanted, but it was illegal to dare say a bad word about the tyrant John Adams.
It just seems to me to be pretty basic common sense that if the states had to ratify the Constitution and give their consent to the authority of the central federal government, then they would have absolutely retain the right to withdraw their consent from the federal government should they disagree.
Well, and Virginia and New York actually added that disclaimer on their ratification documents that we can leave this union at any time. And as we know, if one state has a power or an authority, then all states have the power or the authority. So secession is definitely a power that is retained by the states, despite what the feds try to claim.
Yeah, and on the final note of the program, so what are you up to right now, Derek? What's exciting? What's going on?
Well, thank you for asking, James and Darryl. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm here in Keene today. It's a special event. I did a screening recently here in New Hampshire of my latest movie, which is Derek J's Victimless Crime Spree. I'd like to mention that for the viewers at home, the video is available at both Corner News and Video Headquarters here in Keene. It's also available at order.victimlesscrimespree.com. And if you're looking to check out some information about the movie, you can find it for free at victimlesscrimespree.com. And it's a story about my travels from Philadelphia to Keene and my involvement with the Free State Project and some of the aftermath of what happened after I was arrested for engaging in many victimless crimes, things like dancing in Central Square and filming in City Hall.
And so real quick, you have a daily newscast. What is that? Plug that.
Absolutely. Right now I'm working on a daily podcast, which is also a video cast over on YouTube and LiveLeak. It's called Peace News Now, and it's a 5-minute daily, 7-day-a-week production which focuses on the peaceful news of peaceful resistance. There's plenty of bad news to be seen. It's easy to find stories of Orwellian nightmares come true. I think it's a little harder to find and more refreshing to get peaceful news. That's peacenewsnow.com.
Thank you for joining us, Derek.
And thanks you all at home for watching. I'm James Cleveland.
And I'm Darryl W. Perry. Join us again next week for another episode of ShireTV for more news and analysis.
May you each find happiness, peace, and prosperity.